BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, the Farm to Fork Assurance Scheme Red Tractor, which is promising changes following a critical review.
When I get out in front of farmers, and tell them what we're doing, I've had quite a few farmers stand up in meetings now and tell me that's exactly what they want to hear. That's what they want to see.
We'll explain why European farmers are sexing eggs.
This started actually in Germany, where they said we don't want these chicks to be killed, and then it spread it to other countries.
And we'll discuss the discovery of a sheep in Yorkshire with bird flu.
This is our surveillance working. That actually is quite comforting that we have a programme in place and it's doing what we asked it to do. The risk to general public remains as low.
More on that later. Let's start, though, with the Chancellor's spring statement. Rachel Reeves highlighted plans to build more houses.
Yeah. Reintroducing mandatory housing targets and bringing grey belt land into scope. Yeah. The OBR have today concluded that these reforms will permanently increase the level of real GDP. Yeah.
While the Home Builders Federation and homeless charities welcomed that, the CLA, which represents landowners, said plans to enable the compulsory purchase of land for housing without allowing for market value or the hope value if planning permission is subsequently given was tantamount to asking farmers to bear the costs of fixing a housing crisis they didn't cause. And the County Councils Network pointed out the government's fair funding review is likely to direct funding to urban and city centres at the expense of counties. This is despite county areas facing extreme demand-led pressures alongside the additional costs of delivering services in rural places. Farming unions expressed disappointment that there was no mention of agriculture in the Chancellor's speech, but it was raised by the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride.
She said she wouldn't put up national insurance, but she did. She said she wouldn't cut winter fuel payment, but she did. She said she wouldn't tax farmers, but she did.
Mel Stride in the House of Commons this week. Guy Garrard is Professor of Environmental and Rural Studies at the University of Newcastle's Centre for Rural Economy. He gave Anna Hill his assessment of the Chancellor's statement.
There was nothing new for agriculture in today's speech.
There was talk about budgets in government departments. The Chancellor reiterated the day-to-day spending in departments would be fully protected. So that means the 2025 farming budget for England remains unchanged at £2.4 billion. However, she did mention the government spending review in June, when the government will set out new department budgets. Is there a worry around that?
This is something that the industry is certainly finding very concerning, that the government might start to slash DEFRA's budget. We might see the need for increased spending cuts, and DEFRA has traditionally been a bit of a soft target for that sort of activity.
On the other side, and the Chancellor mentioning growth, building more houses, but that's another pressure, isn't it, on the countryside?
It is. I mean, inevitably, a lot of that pressure is going to come on agricultural land. Potentially, local councils could compulsorily purchase that land from farmers just at cost price, ignoring the hope value that would normally be added onto that.
Then again, if you're building on grey belt areas or even green belt areas, doesn't that boost the rural economy?
Potentially, it may provide new markets for some on-farm enterprises. I think we've got to think very carefully about how we deliver these increases in housing in a way that won't compromise other objectives around nature recovery and food production.
Farming was specifically mentioned, but it was by the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. He talked about taxing farmers in his speech, but the Chancellor made no specific reference to the changes to inheritance tax introduced back in October. It seems to be that is not under consideration.
No, I mean, from reading between the lines, this never seemed likely to be a possibility.
Where does it leave us, do you think, in rural economies?
In a situation of considerable ongoing uncertainty. We've got the consultation at the moment around the land use framework. We've had the blow around the early withdrawal of SFI as well. There are lots of people in the industry who are going to feel that the government is not playing fair with farming. And I think some level of certainty and stability for the industry would be very welcome, but things could easily change in 6 months or a year's time, and more likely for the worse than for the better.
Professor Guy Garrett. Red Tractor has pledged to improve communications with farmers and simplify its audits as part of its response to an independent review. Red Tractor is the assurance scheme which covers farm to fork. Farmers sign up and have to meet standards on things like animal welfare and traceability. Food processors and retailers are also part of the scheme, and consumers can see that food is British and assured by looking for the Red Tractor logo on packs. But, as you may remember, tensions about the scheme boiled over plans to include a Greener Farms commitment. Farmers would have had to meet more environmental standards, which some saw as a way of retailers and food companies meeting their own green targets by getting farmers to do the work. It was subsequently abandoned, and a review of farm assurance was instigated. That was published earlier this year and called for more than 50 changes to the Red Tractor scheme. Anna Hill asked Red Tractor's interim chair, farmer Alistair McIntosh, what changes Red Tractor will be making.
This is an opportunity for us to re-engage with the farming sector. We need to make farm assurance work for farmers, making sure that farmers feel part of farm assurance and they value it.
And it needs to work for them, as you say. So are there technical things that need to happen to make it more efficient for them?
The first things that we're looking at are the audits and trying to make them simpler, how we can reduce audit burden on farmers, reducing the audit points, really challenging the standards. You know, we've been going now for 25 years, and some of the standards that were originally brought in, we have to ask ourselves, are they still as relevant? Do they need changing? We also are very keen to use technology to help with the audit and the audit burden. Using our portal, for example. Here on my farm, we do use the portal, and it has reduced our audit time from a 4-hour audit to an hour and 20s. It does really help if we can encourage more farmers to use the portal.
What about rebuilding trust with farmers? Because there was a lot of criticism, wasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to improve our communication and engagement with farmers. We have employed a new communications and engagement director. We're publishing a very detailed, transparent response, and we're increasing our engagement with farmers. Our sector boards, we're looking at how we can make them work better, using them more as a focus group. When I get out in front of farmers, you know, and tell them what we're doing, and telling them what we're trying to do with reducing the audit burden, using technology, rewarding good compliance. I've had quite a few farmers stand up in meetings now and tell me that's exactly what they want to see, a much reduced audit burden and less stress on them.
This came to a head, really, after the so-called Greener Farms commitment. And that's when Red Tractor wanted environmental standards, gathering data about environmental improvements on farm. What are you going to do about that?
The Greener Farm commitment wasn't a Red Tractor initiative. This was a whole supply chain initiative. And that was rejected by the farming industry at the 11th hour. Now, that has been put aside, and any environmental improvements or any environmental standards will only be engaged in if the whole supply chain asks for it.
The interim chair of Red Tractor, farmer Alistair McIntosh there. Now, eggs. We featured them on Farming Today all this week. That's the programme which goes out at 5:45 every weekday morning here on Radio 4. It's also available anytime you like on BBC Sounds. I think my favourite fact of the week is the staggering 37 million or so eggs, which, according to industry figures, we will eat here in the UK just today. Around 3/4 of those eggs, the eggs we buy in the shops, are free range. Avian flu is, of course, at the forefront of producers' minds at the moment, and free-range layers in many parts of the country must now be kept indoors. It's also been found in a sheep, and we'll talk about that in a bit. In Wales, there haven't been any cases of avian flu so far, but the country is still in a prevention zone, so strict biosecurity measures must be taken. Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to Newport to meet farmer Victoria Shervington-Jones, who owns Country Fresh Eggs. Victoria started off by recording for us inside the hen shed, where access is restricted because of the risk of bird flu.
So I am currently stood in house number 3, which has 12,000 hens in it. As you can hear, they're all very inquisitive of what I'm up to. But they're all very happy, wandering around my feet, having a little peck of their food before they go out to enjoy a bit of the spring sunshine.
All our eggs are free range, so all our birds are allowed out during daylight hours. So as soon as it gets light, the pop holes open and the birds, if they wish, can roam. It's 1,000 birds an acre. So this shed that we're looking at the moment is a 12,000 bird shed. So they've got 12 acres to roam, and they'd like to jump up in the trees and things like that.
Well, Victoria, we're now standing outside one of your chicken sheds, but I can't get too close at the moment because biosecurity is a real issue for you.
It is, yeah, with the bird flu that's around getting ever closer. We restrict anyone coming on farm. Obviously, we've got the wheel washes and the sprays and the foot dips, just all the usual things, but the birds are still out, so there's still a high risk coming from the wild birds. Where we are down here, we're really close to the coast. A lot of wild birds, a lot of swans on the Gwent levels. Quite a lot of pigeons around at the moment.
And we can hear some birds tweeting around us. How are you feeling about all of this?
If we did get it here, it would probably be the end of our business. It is a worry all the time.
And yet you're still continuing to run the business, the free-range egg business. And demand now from consumers seems to be more for free-range eggs.
So we are in 2025 now, and a lot of the supermarkets did say that they would go solely 100% free-range in 2025. Whether that happens or not remains to be seen. But the demand is there. The place where it might fall out a little bit is when people are eating in restaurants and buying cakes and things like that with ingredients in. Where are those eggs coming from? We've lost quite a lot of birds in the UK to bird flu this winter. You know, the supply of egg has dropped and the demand is still there.
Victoria Shervington-Jones there. Well, supplying the egg producers are the pullet rearers, the farms which take day-old chicks and grow them on for 16 weeks before they then move on to laying farms. Noble Foods is one of the largest rearers, producing 4 million birds a year. They supply 250 producers with RSPCA assured birds. Sarah Falkingham went to see one of their farms near Mansfield.
Well, the very first thing with bird flu biosecurity is I am double wrapping my Wellington boots. So I'm walking into this very warm shed with Jean-Paul Michalski, who's in charge of all the rearing of pullets and production for Noble Foods.
So this shed is around 60 metres long, around 20 metres wide. This unit, when it's fully stocked, can take up to around 35,000 birds in total. It's got what is probably the state-of-the-art rearing system at the moment, which is a multi-tiered rearing system, like a huge climbing frame for chickens.
So they're about 4 inches high, still fluffy yellow. What colour are they going to be when they're fully grown?
So these are white birds, which will produce a white egg. These birds can be more productive, eat less food, so there's some real benefits around white egg from a sustainability perspective as well.
And then they will, once they've got the strength, the wire comes down, they can jump down onto this sawdust here, they can go up down these wire little ramps to increase their leg strength, and then they can fly up to wherever the perches are, because they're going off into other systems, aren't they, where they're all multi-tiered and different heights?
Yeah, so with RSPCA assured, we have to ensure that we rear birds on a system that is very similar to the one that they're going to. So if you think about being at university, if you were living in one big room, what we're trying to do is differentiate activity. So if you were at halls and you all lived in one room, someone wanted to have a party, someone wanted to sleep, someone wanted to do their homework, in a system where they're all on the floor, that interaction causes stress. So they can go to the top to sleep, into the system to feed and drink, and they can go on the floor to play around and scratch.
Now, before they've arrived here as day-old chicks, obviously the male 50% or whatever never made it. They were gassed. Are there any other alternatives to that?
Yeah, I think, look, things have moved really fast in that field at the moment, and there's a huge amount of technology that is moving very quickly. I think the reality is at the moment to adopt some of the systems that are in place to allow us to select male chicks are not quite at the point we need them to be. Some of the technologies still mean that we have to set eggs and obviously destroy eggs at certain times during that incubation period. We will get there, but at the moment I don't think the technologies are quite at the point they need to be to allow us to adopt it in a way that will not actually add more complication.
When people buy free-range eggs, will the pullet have been free-range? And if not, why can't it be?
Not the pullet. So like I said, we have these birds from day old to 16 weeks, so you couldn't rear in a free-range system. These birds need to be kept at 35 degrees at housing, and we reduce that temperature around a half a degree a day up to around 5 or 6 weeks. Obviously these birds are going to a free-range system, so they're going to spend the rest of their life out in the field, but our focus is getting that real good development and growth.
And what happens to all the waste? Because obviously there's going to be quite a lot of litter from a site this big.
This is a very valuable product. We're in Lincolnshire at the moment, so there's a huge demand and it's fantastic. Local farmers really love it. In other areas where it's more difficult, a lot of that will go into digesters and it also into power stations to produce electricity.
John-Paul Machelski there, Farms Director at Noble Foods. Well, as he mentioned, for every female chick which grows into a pullet, there's a male chick which will never lay eggs and isn't wanted by egg producers. Every year in the UK, 38 million male chicks are gassed at a day old. The British Egg Industry Council told us this week that it's a humane form of slaughter, and the dead chicks are in huge demand from zoos, reptile keepers and birds of prey centres which feed them to their animals. Even so, the practice of killing day-old chicks remains controversial and has been banned in some countries, including France, Germany, Austria and Italy. So what's the alternative? Well, one way is determining the sex of the chick while it's still in the egg, so the males never hatch at all. Thea von Niekerk, a senior researcher in laying hen welfare at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, told Anna Jones how it works.
Well, there are various methods that are used. The majority of eggs are where they determine the sex is using a method where they take a little bit of fluid out of the egg and then look at hormones or at DNA, and then they can see whether it's a male or a female. And there are also some other methods used where they sort of have a MRI scan or infrared scan where they can look inside the egg and see whether the chick has brown or white feathers, or another method is where they can see the gonads of the chick. Then they can just scan if it's a male or female.
And the colour of the feathers denotes male or female?
Yes, there are some breeds where the males and females differ in colour. One has white feathers and the other has brown feathers.
Once they know, what then happens to the male ones?
These are taken out and they are used for other purposes. So the hatching process is stopped, and then the eggshell is used for making packing stones for laying hens, just to keep them occupied. And it also contains good calcium for the chicks to use. And the content of the egg is used to make meal that goes into feed for other animals.
Where is this being used as a method?
This method is actually used in various European countries and also in the United States. It is mainly used in Germany, the Netherlands, France. These are countries that are really dealing with this issue.
Dealing with it by banning the practice of killing day-old male chicks?
Yes. This started actually in Germany, where they said we don't want these chicks to be killed, and then it spread to other countries. And as the Netherlands are exporting the majority of our eggs to Germany, we have to meet their regulations.
Have the bans come about because of consumer demand and public protests? What's driven governments in these countries to take the decision to ban the culling of day-old male chicks?
Well, I wouldn't say it's really a consumer demand. It's more that several animal welfare organizations found that each animal or each life deserves a life. That's what they felt. And from that idea, the demand came to either rear them or not having them hatched.
Why don't we just eat the males?
they are from genetic lines that are bred to produce eggs and not to produce meat. So these males are very lean. You have to put in a lot of food, and then still they hardly grow. So if you grow them up to 11 or 13 weeks of age, you still have a very lean animal. If you look at how much it costs on food to rear them, then actually you lose money.
So how much does this technology cost?
The cost used to be like 3 cents per table egg, and it's now down to 1 cent, and it will go down even further because the detection methods are better and better, and so there is less waste. Because in the beginning, it was not 100% detection. You always had this gray area of some eggs that could not be marked as female or male. It's reaching 99% accuracy and even sometimes higher.
Ter van Niekerk from Wageningen University. Bird flu's been found in a domestic sheep in the UK for the first time. The case in Yorkshire was confirmed earlier this week. DEFRA say the sheep was on a farm where avian flu was present in captive birds, and that this suggests an obvious route of transmission from wild birds to captive birds to the sheep. The rest of the small flock of sheep were tested. They were all negative. Surveillance of mammals for avian flu has been stepped up. That's partly because in the United States, many dairy cattle and even some dairy workers have also gone down with the disease. Well, Christine Middlemiss is the UK's chief vet. She told Anna Hill what they found.
We have been risk assessing where we find mammals, cows and sheep, primarily, because we always sample pigs, on confirmed poultry bird flu farms. And on this occasion, we risk assessed and we decided to sample the sheep. And of the 10 sheep sampled, one of them had a positive result for antibodies. So we opted to cull her for extensive testing. We sampled 19 other sheep, very small, it's backyard premises, and they are all negative, and her lambs are negative.
Would there be clinical signs of avian flu in sheep and other livestock?
Given this is the first finding of it, and we found it because we went looking on our surveillance, then probably not. And this was, say, very localised infection, but it was an infection there. And it mirrors in the US dairy cattle, they have found mastitis sometimes just in one quarter, right? Not in the whole udder. Sometimes the cows have been sick, and I think a few cows have died. They've had a more systemic infection. The important thing is that risk assessment. Is there potential contact between known infected birds and mammals? Biosecurity, that cleanliness is so important. And then if you're treating a mastitis and it's not making progress, do submit samples. So where a treatment for a fairly well-known disease is not working, then we will test it for other potential causes.
So you are testing all livestock now around avian flu outbreaks, is that right?
No, it's very specifically on farms where we have confirmed avian influenza, because those are the ones most likely to have an increased risk. We will always continue to risk assess. So if we felt there was more risk to other neighbouring farms from this individual sheep, then we would go and sample them. In this case, we don't.
What about wild mammals? I know there's been a case in grey seals on the North Norfolk coast, but what about other, like deer, for instance?
So we found it in wild mammals that are known to prey on dead wild birds. So we've had the seals, we had a case of, I think it was raccoon dogs, quite a number of months ago now in a wildlife park where they were fed dead shot pheasant. I guess this is the first time it's been found in a sheep, and of course sheep aren't eating other animals. It has come through indirect contact with the level of contamination.
What is your advice to sheep farmers then?
We don't think there's increased risk if there's not a clear pathway. So I wouldn't be worrying about necessarily being near a poultry farm, but don't leave open sheep feed if you can avoid it, where wild birds can come along and they have bird droppings in the feed and then the sheep eats them. These sorts of things are important to be aware of.
How worried are you that there has been a case in sheep, full stop?
Well, this is our surveillance working. You know, we have a risk-based programme and it said, well, there is risk and we found one sheep and the other sheep are negative. So that actually is quite comforting that we have a programme in place and it's doing what we asked it to do. And they say the risk to general public remains as low. And additionally, Food Standards Agency say the risk to the general public is very low.
The UK's chief vet, Christine Middlemiss. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.